Scrutiny, a Critical Examination by Alex Rich and Lucy Madrigal. After the end of the Civil War, an amendment was passed to provide fair treatment of the former slaves by the states. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which does what the 5th Amendment did for the federal government for the states, prevents unreasonable discrimination based on the use of classifications. Other than race discrimination, the 14th Amendment was not really considered useful. Historically, if the legislative classification was something other than national origin or race, the courts would generally not strike it down as an equal protection violation. For example, many laws did not give equal rights to men and women, which today would most likely be struck down, but since gender isn't a strict classification, the courts would probably let it stand. Since the Due Process Clause was widely used to strike down state laws in the early 1900s, the Equal Protection Clause didn't carry as much power. Under the Warren Court, big changes took place when classifying cases using the Equal Protection Clause. Warren broadened as well as strengthened the Equal Protection Clause by creating the concepts like suspect classifications and strict scrutiny, which included the classifications of race and national origin. The Warren Court also created the concept of fundamental rights, another area that required a stricter level of scrutiny. Scrutiny is used within the court when the court has to look closely at every detail in order to declare state laws constitutional. Scrutiny is used as a form of judicial review for the courts to make sure the states and federal government are not creating laws that are aimed to infringe on the rights of the people. There are 3 levels of scrutiny the court uses to determine the constitutionality of laws: rational basis scrutiny or minimal scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, and strict scrutiny. Rational basis or minimum scrutiny, the lowest level of scrutiny, is based on there being some rational relationship between disparity of treatment and some legitimate governmental purpose. Although a state does not need to have a stated purpose when passing a law, there must be a conceivable legitimate purpose to which the law could be rationally related to in order to pass the rational basis test. For example, in Regency Expressway v. New York, a small city in Connecticut was able to ban advertisements on private vehicles except if the services/products advertised on the vehicle were offered by the owner of that vehicle. The town was seeing an uprise in the amount of traffic accidents due to all of the advertisements on the vehicles. Because the law did not go far enough to ban all advertisements, and the purpose of this law was to greatly reduce traffic accidents, it was deemed constitutional under rational basis scrutiny. An example that wouldn't pass rational basis scrutiny is Metropolitan Life Insurance Company v. Ward. In this case, Alabama wanted to tax out-of-state insurance companies at a higher rate than in-state insurance companies, simply because Alabama wants their in-state insurance companies to be more profitable. Discriminating against out-of-state insurance companies to better the in-state insurance company is not a legitimate state goal, therefore the court struck it down. For the longest time, all court cases were decided by either strict or rational basis scrutiny. Beginning in the Burger Court in 1969, the idea of medium scrutiny began to develop. Medium or intermediate scrutiny, the second level of scrutiny, is used in all non-suspect classes, also known as quasi-suspect classes, sex or illegitimacy. In order for a state to pass a law involving this level of scrutiny, the state must have a genuine, not made-up reason. The justification by the state must be exceedingly persuasive as well. In the Clark v. Jeter in 1988 case, the court ruled that to withstand intermediate scrutiny, a statutory classification must be substantially related to an important governmental objective. An example of this would be the case Rotzker v. Goldberg. The Military Selective Service Act authorizes the President to require the registration for possible military service of males, but not females. The court ruled the act constitutional, saying, "The existence of the combat restrictions clearly indicates the basis for Congress's decision to exempt women from registration. The purpose of registration was to prepare for a draft of combat troops. Since women are excluded from combat, Congress concluded that they would not be needed and it fell into the category of medium scrutiny, which only required an exceedingly persuasive reason to remain constitutional. The court's reason being that men and women, because of the combat restrictions on women, are simply not similarly situated for purposes of a draft or registration for a draft, therefore there was no violation of the Due Process Clause." An example of a case that would not pass medium scrutiny would be United States v. Virginia. The Virginia Military Institute was a long-standing military school known for their excellence in graduating great minds and turning them into leaders, but only if those young great minds came from a male body, women were not allowed into the institution. If the state puts legislation into motion that they want the school to remain strictly male, the legislation would have a hard time passing because even though the tradition had been in place for the past 150 years, there had to be a very persuasive justification for the school to remain strictly male in order for this case to pass medium scrutiny. Strict scrutiny, the highest level of scrutiny, is used when there is a question regarding race or national origin. In order for a law to survive under strict scrutiny, the state must prove a compelling reason for justification, not just an important reason. This law also must be necessary for achieving the state's objective. Finally, the law must be narrowly tailored to the objective of the state as well. An example of this is in the case State v. Crane. Here, a 19-year-old Benjamin Crane was involved in an automobile accident while under the influence of alcohol. The court ruled that he would have his license suspended for 1 year, have to pay a fine of $250, and do 20 hours of community service. Crane argued that the driving while impaired statute that he was convicted under was unconstitutional because it violated his equal protection rights. More specifically, Crane argues that subjecting adults ages 18 to 21 to sanctions based upon 0.02% blood alcohol content, while not subjecting adults ages 21 and older to the same sanctions, violates his rights to equal protection. The case was appealed to the Supreme Court and looked at under strict scrutiny. The court found that keeping the streets and public safe from youths who were under the influence while driving was a compelling reason to create the statute. They found that because it is illegal for those under the age of 21 to even consume alcohol, that it was reasonable that driving offenses while under the influence for those under the age of 21 would be appropriate. The statute was narrowly tailored to provide this sanction against young drivers who are not allowed to consume alcoholic beverages and who would present a danger to the public. For that reason, they found that the statute passed strict scrutiny and was constitutional. An example of a case that did not meet the standard of strict scrutiny was Nyquist v. Maclay, which challenged a statute that restricted the receipt of scholarships and similar financial support to aliens who were applying for citizenship or who filed a statement affirming their intent to apply as soon as they became eligible. The statute only discriminates against those who are not U.S. citizens and only those people, and because state classifications based on national origin are inherently suspect, then the statute is subject to strict scrutiny. Because the statute only discriminates against aliens, the court ruled that the New York statute was unconstitutional because it violated equal protection. Well, that wraps up the critical examination of scrutiny. When trying to decipher between the 3 levels of scrutiny, just remember the level of state interest and the reason needed for each. Rational basis just needs a rational reason, while medium scrutiny is used in cases involving gender or illegitimacy, the reason being genuine. Strict scrutiny is used when race or national origin is in question, and the reason cannot just be rational, it must be compelling as well. Happy scrutinizing!